The dust-filled air carried the pitiful cries of a young boy through Silverado Creek's Main Street, as Benjamin Xavier pulled his horse to a halt outside the saloon. His weathered face creased with concern at the sight of the small figure huddled against the general store's wall, a hand outstretched in desperation. It was 1875, and the mining town of Silverado Creek, Colorado, had seen its fair share of hard times. The silver vein that had once promised fortune had thinned, leaving many families destitute. Benjamin dismounted his chestnut mare with practiced ease, his spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk as he approached the child. "Please, mister," the boy croaked, his voice hoarse from thirst and hunger. "Just a piece of bread. Anything." Benjamin knelt down, his 6-foot frame bending to meet the boy's gaze. The child couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with dirt-streaked cheeks and clothes hanging loose on his thin frame. "What's your name, son?" Benjamin asked, his deep voice softened. "Thomas, sir, Thomas Miller." "Where are your folks, Thomas?" The boy's eyes welled with tears. "They died in the fever last month. Been staying at the orphanage, but they don't have enough food for everyone." Benjamin's jaw tightened. He'd heard about the typhoid outbreak that had swept through the poorer section of town. The local orphanage, run by the church, was overflowing with children who had lost their parents. "You'll never beg again, Thomas," Benjamin said firmly, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's a promise." He helped the boy to his feet and led him toward the general store. The shopkeeper, Zachariah Finch, eyed them suspiciously as they entered. "This boy needs food," Benjamin stated, pulling coins from his pocket. "Give him whatever he wants." As Thomas hesitantly selected bread, cheese, and dried apple slices, Benjamin's mind raced. He couldn't simply feed the boy and send him back to an overcrowded orphanage. His ranch outside of town had plenty of room, but he knew nothing about raising children. At 32, he'd spent most of his adult life alone, working cattle and keeping to himself. "Thomas, how would you feel about coming to work at my ranch?" Benjamin asked as they exited the store. "Nothing too strenuous, mind you, just helping with the chickens, gathering eggs. You'd have your own bed and 3 square meals a day." The boy's eyes widened. "You mean it, mister?" "I do." "And call me Ben." That afternoon, Benjamin took Thomas to the orphanage to make arrangements. The building was a dreary 2-story structure with peeling paint and windows that rattled in their frames. Inside, the smell of too many bodies in too little space was overwhelming. Zoe Vaughn, the young woman who greeted them, had dark circles under her eyes but maintained a warm smile. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her simple blue dress bore signs of mending. "Mr. Xavier," she said, recognizing him from his infrequent trips into town. "What brings you here today?" Benjamin explained his intention to take Thomas as a ward, providing him with room, board, and education in exchange for light work around the ranch. Miss Vaughn's blue eyes studied him intently. "That's very generous, Mr. Xavier, but I must ensure the children in our care go to suitable homes." "I understand," Benjamin replied, removing his hat. "I have a modest ranch 5 miles west of town, 300 acres, 40 head of cattle, a vegetable garden. It's not much, but it's honest work and a decent place to grow up." Thomas looked between them anxiously. "Please, Miss Zoe, Mr. Ben gave me food and promised I'd never have to beg again." Miss Vaughn's expression softened. "I'll need to inspect your home, Mr. Xavier, and draw up proper papers." "Of course. Would tomorrow be convenient?" She nodded, then turned to Thomas. "Go gather your things, Thomas, and say goodbye to your friends." As the boy scampered off, Benjamin shifted uncomfortably under Miss Vaughn's scrutiny. "You've never shown interest in taking in a child before," she remarked. "I've never seen a child begging for bread in the street before," he countered. "Makes a man think about what matters." Something in his honest response seemed to satisfy her. When Thomas returned with his meager possessions tied in a small bundle, Miss Vaughn handed Benjamin some papers. "These grant temporary guardianship until I can inspect your home and file proper documentation with the judge. I'll ride out tomorrow morning." Benjamin nodded, tipping his hat. "We'll be expecting you, Miss Vaughn." The ride to the ranch was quiet, with Thomas clinging to Benjamin's waist as they rode. The boys' wonder was evident as they approached the modest but well-maintained homestead nestled in a valley with a creek running along its eastern edge. "This is all yours?" Thomas asked in awe. "It is. Built it with my own 2 hands after the war." "Were you a soldier?" Benjamin nodded, his expression clouding briefly. "Union cavalry, but that's a long time ago now." He showed Thomas to a small bedroom off the main living area. It had been meant for a child that never came, part of a dream he'd abandoned years ago when his fiancée Clara had died of pneumonia before they could marry. "This is really for me?" Thomas asked, running his hand over the quilt on the bed. "Really is. Now let's get you washed up for supper." Later that night, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Benjamin sat on his porch contemplating the sudden change in his life. He wondered if he'd made a rash decision, taking in a child when he barely interacted with other people. The only regular visitors to his ranch were the men who helped with cattle drives twice a year. The next morning, Benjamin was teaching Thomas how to collect eggs from the chicken coop when the sound of an approaching horse drew their attention. Miss Vaughn rode up on a dappled mare, her riding skirt and jacket more practical than her dress from the previous day. "Good morning, Mr. Xavier, Thomas," she called, dismounting with surprising grace. "Miss Vaughn," Benjamin greeted, suddenly conscious of his unshaven face and work clothes. "Would you care for some coffee?" "That would be lovely, thank you." Thomas eagerly showed Miss Vaughn around the ranch while Benjamin prepared coffee and some biscuits from breakfast. He watched from the kitchen window as the boy pointed out the barn, the cattle in the distance, and the vegetable garden with obvious pride, as if he'd lived there for years instead of a single night. When they returned to the house, Miss Vaughn's inspection was thorough but fair. She examined Thomas's bedroom, checked the pantry to ensure adequate food supplies, and inquired about Benjamin's plans for the boy's education. "I've got books," Benjamin explained, showing her a small bookshelf in the main room. "I read every night. I can teach him the basics, and when he's ready, he can attend school in town during the winter months when ranch work is lighter." "You're educated then?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Pennsylvania. She made sure I knew my letters and numbers, history and science too. I've continued my education through books." Miss Vaughn nodded approvingly, making notes in a small ledger she carried. "And what about social interactions? A boy needs more than just books and cattle for company." Benjamin hadn't considered this. "I suppose we could attend church in town on Sundays, and there's the harvest festival and such." "That would be a start," she agreed, "but perhaps I could visit weekly to check on Thomas's progress and provide some additional instruction." "I was a teacher before I became the orphanage director." Benjamin was surprised by the offer. "That's very generous, Miss Vaughn. It's my responsibility to ensure Thomas thrives, Mr. Xavier. And truthfully, I'd welcome the chance to escape town occasionally." Her candor made him smile. "Then we'd be glad to have you, wouldn't we, Thomas?" The boy nodded enthusiastically, clearly already fond of both adults in his life. After completing her inspection, Miss Vaughn seemed satisfied. "I'll file the guardianship papers with Judge Wilson tomorrow." "You appear to be providing a good home, Mr. Xavier." "Thank you, Miss Vaughn, and please call me Benjamin or Ben." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Then you must call me Zoe." "Would you stay for lunch, Miss Zoe? Thomas and I were going to make stew." She hesitated, then smiled. "I'd like that." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Thomas quickly adapted to ranch life, eagerly learning to care for the animals and help with chores. Benjamin found himself enjoying the boy's company, his natural curiosity and resilience reminding Benjamin of himself at that age. Zoe visited every Wednesday, arriving mid-morning and staying through lunch. She brought books and schoolwork for Thomas, but also news from town and a feminine presence that Benjamin hadn't realized his home was missing. One Wednesday in late June, nearly 2 months after Thomas had come to the ranch, Zoe arrived looking troubled. "What's wrong?" Benjamin asked as he helped her down from her horse. "The orphanage is in financial trouble," she admitted. "The church committee is threatening to close it down and send the children to Denver." "How many children are we talking about?" 12, ranging from 4 to 16. "Most are still recovering from losing their parents in the fever." Benjamin frowned. "Sending them away from the only home they know isn't right." "No, it isn't," Zoe agreed. "But without funds for repairs and food, we can't continue." Throughout the lesson with Thomas, Benjamin could see Zoe was distracted. When Thomas went to feed the chickens after lunch, Benjamin brought up the subject again. How much would it take to keep the orphanage running? Zoe looked surprised by his direct question. "About $200 would see us through the next 6 months. The roof needs repairs before winter, and food prices have risen since the mine reduced operations." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "I'm taking 40 head of cattle to Denver next week. Should fetch a good price. I could spare 200. Zoe's eyes widened. "Benjamin, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't accept. It's not charity," he interrupted. "Consider it an investment in the town's future. Those children deserve a chance just like Thomas." Tears welled in Zoe's eyes. "Why would you do this?" Benjamin looked away, uncomfortable with her emotion. "I know what it's like to be alone. Lost my parents young too, though I was lucky enough to have an uncle who took me in." He met her gaze. Besides, Thomas would be heartbroken if his friends were sent away. Impulsively, Zoe stepped forward and embraced him. Benjamin stiffened in surprise before awkwardly returning the hug, acutely aware of her warmth and the subtle scent of lavender in her hair. When she pulled back, both were flushed with embarrassment. "I should go," Zoe said quickly. "Thank you, Benjamin. Truly." After she left, Benjamin found himself thinking about the feeling of her in his arms far more than was proper. The cattle drive to Denver took Benjamin away from the ranch for 2 weeks. He left Thomas in the care of his nearest neighbor, elderly Mrs. Peterson, who lived 3 miles away and was delighted to have company. When he returned, Thomas was eager to share everything he'd learned and done in Benjamin's absence. "And Miss Zoe came to visit me at Mrs. Peterson's house twice," Thomas exclaimed. "She brought me new books and taught me about maps. She said you're a hero for saving the orphanage." Benjamin felt his face warm. "Did she now?" "Uh-huh." "And Mrs. Peterson said you and Miss Zoe would make a handsome couple." "Mrs. Peterson should mind her own business," Benjamin muttered, though the thought had crossed his mind more than once during the lonely nights on the trail. The next day was Wednesday, and Benjamin found himself unusually concerned with his appearance before Zoe's arrival. He shaved carefully, put on a clean shirt, and even attempted to tame his unruly brown hair. When Zoe arrived, she too seemed different, her hair arranged more elegantly than usual, her dress newer and more flattering to her slender figure. "Benjamin," she greeted him warmly. "The town committee is overwhelmed by your generosity. The roof repairs have already begun." "I'm glad to hear it," he replied, suddenly tongue-tied in her presence. Thomas, oblivious to the adult's awkwardness, launched into stories about his stay with Mrs. Peterson, giving them time to regain their composure. As summer progressed into fall, Benjamin found himself looking forward to Wednesdays with increasing anticipation. Zoe's visits extended longer each time, and sometimes she would stay for dinner. Thomas would often conveniently find reasons to leave the adults alone, his matchmaking attempts obvious but endearing. One crisp October afternoon, Benjamin and Zoe walked along the creek while Thomas practiced his reading inside. The aspens were turning golden, their leaves shimmering in the breeze. "You've done wonders with Thomas," Zoe remarked. "He's thriving here. He's a good boy, makes it easy." "You're too modest. Not many men would have taken in a starving orphan and given him a real home." She hesitated, then added, "Clara would have been proud." Benjamin stopped walking. "How do you know about Clara?" Zoe blushed. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned her. I'm sorry if I overstepped." Benjamin sighed, sitting on a fallen log. After a moment, Zoe joined him. Clara and I were to be married in '68. She caught pneumonia that winter, never recovered. I'm sorry, Zoe said softly, placing her hand over his. This room I gave Thomas, it was meant to be our child's. I built this house for a family that never came to be. Zoe's fingers tightened around his. You have a family now, Benjamin, different than you planned perhaps, but a family nonetheless. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw understanding in her eyes. What about you, Zoe? You never speak of your past. She smiled sadly. Not much to tell. My parents died when I was 16. I became a teacher to support myself. Came west 3 years ago when the school in my Pennsylvania town closed. Ended up at the orphanage because I couldn't bear to see children suffering. You have a good heart, Benjamin said, as do you. Their gazes held, and Benjamin felt a pull toward her that he hadn't experienced in years. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. When they parted, Zoe's eyes remained closed for a moment, a soft smile on her lips. I've been hoping you would do that, she admitted. Have you now? Benjamin replied, his confidence growing. Mrs. Peterson isn't the only one who thinks we'd make a handsome couple. Benjamin laughed, then sobered. I'm just a rancher, Zoe, not much to offer a learned woman like yourself. You offer kindness, integrity, and a heart big enough to save a starving boy and an entire orphanage. She touched his cheek. That's worth more than gold to me. As fall deepened into winter, Zoe's visits to the ranch became more frequent. She began staying overnight on Wednesdays, sleeping in Benjamin's room while he took the sofa. Though nothing improper occurred, the arrangement raised eyebrows in town, particularly among the church committee members who oversaw the orphanage. In early December, Reverend Foster, the head of the committee, requested a meeting with Zoe. Your conduct with Mr. Xavier is causing talk, Miss Vaughn, he said sternly. As director of the orphanage, you must maintain an unblemished reputation. There has been nothing inappropriate in my relationship with Mr. Xavier, Zoe defended herself. He has opened his home to provide education for Thomas, and yes, we have developed feelings for each other. Nevertheless, you must choose. Either end these overnight visits or resign your position. Devastated, Zoe rode to the ranch that evening through a light snowfall. When she arrived, Benjamin took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. After Thomas was asleep, she explained the ultimatum. I can't bear to abandon the children at the orphanage, she concluded tearfully. But the thought of not seeing you and Thomas regularly. Benjamin paced the room, anger evident in his stride. It's not right, them dictating your personal life. They're not entirely wrong, Benjamin. What would you think of an unmarried woman who spends nights at a bachelor's home? He stopped pacing and turned to her. Then marry me, Zoe's breath caught. What? Benjamin crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. I love you, Zoe. I think I have since that day you came to inspect my home and cared enough to worry about Thomas having friends. Marry me and there will be no more talk of impropriety. Benjamin, she whispered, are you certain marriage is a serious step? I've been alone for 7 years since Clara died. I never thought I'd find love again. Then Thomas came into my life and you followed, and suddenly this house became a home again. He squeezed her hands. I'm more certain about this than anything in my life. Tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Silverado Creek. Thomas stood proudly as Benjamin's best man, and the children from the orphanage filled the first 2 pews. Even Reverend Foster seemed moved by the obvious love between the couple. After the ceremony, Benjamin surprised Zoe by revealing that he had purchased the vacant building next to their church. What's this? She asked, confused by the key he placed in her hand. A school, he explained. Silverado Creek needs a proper school and you're a teacher without a classroom. The town committee has already approved funding for supplies and your salary. Zoe was speechless, looking from the key to her new husband in wonder. This way, You can continue working with the orphanage children and all the town's children while still coming home to us each night." "You thought of everything," she managed finally. "I want you to be happy, Zoe. I know teaching is your calling." "You and Thomas are my calling too," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the townspeople applauded. By spring of 1876, the Xavier household had expanded. In addition to Benjamin, Zoe, and Thomas, they had welcomed 2 more children from the orphanage siblings, whose prospects for adoption had been dim due to the boy's lame leg. 8-year-old Emma and her 6-year-old brother James adapted quickly to ranch life, with Thomas proudly showing them the ropes. Zoe's school flourished, with 15 students attending regularly. She rode into town 3 days a week to teach, while Benjamin expanded his cattle operation and began breeding horses as well. The additional income allowed them to improve the ranch, adding 2 more bedrooms to accommodate their growing family. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the children play in the yard, Zoe turned to Benjamin with a nervous smile. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "By Christmas, we'll have 1 more mouth to feed." Benjamin stared at her in wonder before breaking into a radiant smile. "A baby, our baby," Zoe nodded, laughing as he lifted her from her chair and spun her around. "Our baby. The doctor confirmed it yesterday." Benjamin set her down gently, his face suddenly serious. "Are you happy about this?" "With the school and the other children, I'm ecstatic," she interrupted. "This child will have the most wonderful father and the best siblings any baby could ask for." When they told the children that night, their reactions were priceless. Thomas puffed up with importance at the prospect of being a big brother yet again. Emma immediately began planning what she would teach the baby, while James solemnly promised to share his toys. As summer ripened into autumn, Zoe's condition became increasingly obvious. She continued teaching until November, when the first heavy snow made travel to town too difficult. By then, the whole community was invested in the coming Xavier baby, with gifts of handmade blankets and clothes arriving regularly. On Christmas morning, as a heavy snow fell outside, Zoe gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Dr. Collins, who had ridden through the storm to attend the birth, pronounced mother and child perfectly healthy. "She's beautiful," Benjamin whispered, cradling his daughter with tears in his eyes. "What shall we name her?" Zoe smiled tiredly. "How about Clara, to honor the love that came before?" Benjamin's throat tightened with emotion. "Clara Zoe Xavier, it's perfect." Later that day, when the children were allowed to meet their new sister, Thomas approached the bed cautiously. "She's so tiny," he marveled, peering at the infant in Zoe's arms. "You were tiny once too," Benjamin reminded him, ruffling the boy's hair. Thomas looked up at the man who had changed his life that day on the street nearly 2 years before. "I'm glad I was begging that day," he said seriously. "Even though it was awful, because you found me." "No, son," Benjamin corrected gently. "You found me. I was just as lost as you were in my own way." As the family gathered around the bed, marveling at their newest member, Benjamin reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A starving orphan, a chance encounter, a promise that a boy would never beg again. That promise had not only changed Thomas's life, but had brought Benjamin a family he'd thought forever beyond his reach. And as he looked at his wife, their new daughter, and the 3 older children who completed their family, Benjamin knew with absolute certainty that some promises were meant to last a lifetime. 5 years later, the Xavier Ranch had doubled in size and prosperity. 2 more children had joined the family, twin boys named William and Joseph, now toddling around the expanded farmhouse. Thomas, at 15, had grown into a responsible young man who helped run the ranch and excelled at the advanced studies Zoe provided. Emma had discovered a talent for training horses, while James, despite his leg, had become an expert gardener, expanding their vegetable plot into a productive market garden. Zoe's school had grown too, moving to a larger building as Silverado Creek experienced a revival. The discovery of a new silver vein had brought miners and their families back to town, and Benjamin's reputation as a fair businessman and kind-hearted man had made him a respected community leader. On warm summer evenings, the family still gathered on the porch to watch the sunset over the western mountains. Benjamin and Zoe would sit side by side, their hands intertwined, surrounded by the family that had begun with a simple act of compassion on a dusty street. "You know," Zoe said one such evening as they watched 3-year-old Clara teaching the twins to dance in the yard, "I think about that day sometimes when you found Thomas begging for bread." Benjamin smiled, squeezing her hand. "Best decision I ever made, taking him home." "Second best," she corrected with a teasing smile. "Marrying me was your best decision." "Can't argue with that logic," he laughed. Leaning over to kiss her from the yard, Thomas called out, "Pa, come show Clara how to do that fancy cavalry riding trick." "Duty calls," Benjamin said, rising from his chair. As he joined the children in the yard, lifting Clara onto his shoulders while the twins clamored for their turn, Zoe watched with a heart full of gratitude. The orphan boy who had begged for bread had found not just food and shelter but a father who had kept his promise. And in keeping that promise, Benjamin Xavier had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come.